Good evening. I'm Keisha Rogers, and I want to thank you for joining us again. If this is your first time on, thank you for joining us with Promethean Action. And I am joined by Michael Stager. We're going to be leading the discussion, Michael and I leading the discussion on the continuation of what has been a very profound topic of discussion in terms of a transformation that's happening in our nation and in the culture overall. If you missed it on this past weekend, Tony Pappert and Bruce Director, colleagues of ours, led a very important discussion, really centered on the scientific breakthroughs on the question of Christian civilization by Lyndon LaRouche that he gave a presentation on back some time ago in his life. And so what I wanted to start with, just kind of to remind people of what Michael put out in presenting and opening this discussion for tonight. And it's a continuation of what we discussed last week, which I think was a very provocative and really took to a different level this question of what the fight is all about in the aftermath of Charlie Kirk's assassination, which has profoundly touched so many people, especially young people. The question is, what is the fight that young people in their search for their identity in Christ, their identity in terms of what they represent from what Charlie Kirk represented, this idea that what does it mean to be a citizen of a republic? And he fully understood that. And so for tonight's discussion, as we outlined, who and what is MAGA? Very important question because this comes up a lot. And why the oligarchs hate Christianity. Um, so the discussion title starts out tonight or is put forth tonight asking the question, everyone is trying to define MAGA. Is it anti-woke, economic populist, or pro or anti-Israel or Islam? In some ways, this is a response to the assassination of Charlie Kirk and the escalation of the political war. Literal definitions of anything of substance is a lost cause. What is God? Who are you? What is America? These are living, creative, and soul-filled processes that are without mathematical definitions. But the enemy never stops trying to reduce important ideas down to something akin to nothing. This is total side war. So I wanted to just read those opening remarks there as we try to unfold the question of what is going on in our society. How do we actually protect and defend the highest ideas of Christian civilization? And I think those highest ideas during Tony Pappert's presentation, as he was reading the text from Lyndon LaRouche on science of Christian civilization, LaRouche referred to a very important passage in biblical context, but which has universal context as well in terms of the fight to put an end to usury, put an end to the destructive oligarchical powers over humanity. And that biblical context is found in Luke 19, verse 40. And so I ask that we reflect on that and the true meaning and understanding of that as we go through this discussion tonight. And in essence, this is the context that reads when the Pharisees are telling Christ to rebuke his disciples to stop them from going into the Mount of Olives. And he says that if I stop them, the rocks will certainly cry out. This has very important meaning to it. So we're going to discuss this in the context of the political fight and the fight to defend and save Christian civilization. So with that, let me just turn it over to Michael for his opening remarks and comments.
Thanks, Keisha. Okay, so welcome. Thanks for joining us. So it was an intense week last week. It's worth just noting at the top here that Trump was able to pull Netanyahu and the Israelis and Hamas over the line in terms of at least a tentative agreement on an ending of the Gaza war. So a release of all hostages, which basically ends Hamas's leverage of any power. The Arab states involved agreeing that Hamas should have no role, that Trump should be the head of an interim government in Gaza that will have Arabs and others participating, Turks on the board, governing this with various military and police deployments from those nations, as well as maybe nations like Italy. And Israel will do a certain prisoner swap for the hostages, and they'll withdraw at least to a certain boundary within Gaza, and eventually remove out of Gaza. That's at least the basic dynamic here. And Trump, of course, then, he got an agreement from Hamas. He told Israel to stop bombing. The thing that stands out with all of this, and it kind of gets us into a little bit of what is MAGA. And this question, what is MAGA? I mean, in some sense, you get a sense at times that there are operations that kind of can enter even from a peripheral direction, but are coordinated to target certain aspects of kind of the MAGA, online community. That all of a sudden you hear everybody kind of discussing things in a certain way. And one way has come up of, well, MAGA is this, MAGA is not that. Some people say MAGA should be this. Clearly that's not what Trump thinks. We know what Trump thinks. We can tell you what Trump thinks. This is what MAGA is. This is what MAGA isn't. These people should be kicked out of MAGA. You should enforce kicking them out of MAGA. You're one of the gatekeepers. We've anointed you a gatekeeper. So there's this kind of discussion. People like Megyn Kelly have been pressured to ban Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens over their comments on Israel. Probably other aspects to that, but that's at least the overt one. A Revolver magazine article, Revolver website article came out basically saying MAGA is woke. MAGA is anti-woke. That's really the core of MAGA. MAGA is not economic populism. MAGA is not trust busting. MAGA is not stopping mergers and acquisitions. And there's a big fight inside Trump's Department of Justice antitrust division over the kinds of obsessions that Wall Street has with more and more mergers and acquisitions. So that became a contention. But there's all these discussions taking place, and it just kind of comes back to important to look at what is this movement? And certainly the assassination of Charlie Kirk also then spurred similar questions. Well, who is Charlie Kirk? Many people wanted to focus on this one clip. He was asked, if you were to like die tomorrow, what would you want to be remembered for? And he said, the courage of my faith, which is fine. I mean, he said it. There's no doubt that his Christian faith was incredibly important to Charlie. But there's also an attempt to maybe use that to say that Charlie is just merely a question of Christian faith. And without even discussing, which ultimately is a big question, what is Christianity? It's not like that can be answered. You could ask 100 different Christians and get 100 different answers. All of them may have to do with Christ and so on, but there's going to be a lot of different shades in that, and some very big differences. and some contradictions. And there have been wars fought over, or at least ostensibly fought over, these distinctions within the Christian faith. So, um, a lot of this is a psychological warfare that's targeting how this movement continues to proceed. And it's happening in the wake of a defining moment for MAGA, a defining moment for what I've described for the last 4 years as the most important strategic development in the world, which is the emergence of a clear kind of MAGA movement. Up until the lockdowns of COVID and the election steal and J6 and so on, there was not this kind of coherent mobilization that I've got to do something, that the responsibility is on me. And we see that within the young people today. In the wake of Charlie's assassination, there's an increasing sense of subjective tension. I've got to become better. I've got to become more courageous, bolder, sharper, clear on how we're going to wage this fight for the country. And that's been an ongoing theme. The individual responsibility has been adopted. And so, you know, that is something that the enemy wants to stop. And I think if anyone was watching the news, or if you have any friends, I had some neighbor come by my house the other day and just kind of randomly, kind of a Tourette syndrome, Trump voter, former Trump supporter, but he has been caught up in an online web of commentary on the wars. And people like Colonel McGregor or Larry Johnson or Redacted News, and some of these other kind of online outlets that people have looked to for kind of assessments. McGregor was very prescient on the fact that Russia was going to invade Ukraine. But since that moment, his foresight has dwindled, and he's basically turned into a very cynical voice. There's never going to be peace. There's never going to be an end to this. The United States is screwed. It's kind of like a Ron Paul voice. There's a number of voices, a lot of them libertarians, a lot of them just kind of sucked into this kind of climate that want to suck people into a kind of an outlook that maybe is statistically right more times than not. But the whole point of individual subjective change that's emerging in this movement means that it's not a question of, am I right? Have I been right? Or is the cynic voice right? It's that I have to take responsibility to make something happen. So I'm betting now that what has been the statistical, likely outcome is going to be different because I'm taking responsibility to do something different. And that's certainly Trump's effort. And to me, I mean, if you want to get at what Christianity is, in terms of things we can assert with clear knowledge of what is good that Christianity has brought us, is that there is a question of a tender heart in response to what is true and what is good. That one shall not make their heart hard to that which is good and true, to the light, to God, to creation. That one won't become cynical and hard to it. Because we all can attest that that's a fundamental prerequisite to making any real changes and going forward. That's the whole eruption of this MAGA movement. That's the whole response we see with Charlie Kirk and his widow wife, Erica, where she said, I don't want to have a hard heart. She's not forgiving the murderer simply to save him. She's forgiving the murderer of her husband because she doesn't want her heart to become hardened and cynical and enraged. She wants to continue to play a role for the future the way Charlie would want. I mean, that kind of conception. And so the amount of cynicism around this Gaza deal has been kind of a clear test to say, okay, there are clearly some people that just don't get it, that don't understand how this process is going that they are going to be an instrument of change. Social media is a box, a black box of kind of a magnetic black box with two polar opposites, constantly kind of creating this kind of cynical echo chamber, how bad the other side is. But rarely do you have vulnerable voices saying, this is the good, this is the true, this is where we have to go as a country. And this is what I'm willing to do. And that's kind of what we try to do on these discussions. That's why we invite people on. That's why we want these kinds of processes, because we've got to challenge this dynamic. And in some sense, that is a very clear element of MAGA. We want to create peace, even if the odds are against us. Even if, no matter what peace agreement you make, the Israelis and the Gazans, Palestinians are still going to want to annihilate each other, doesn't prevent us from saying that that's what needs to happen, and we're going to continue to fight for it. Life itself is a statistical improbability. Human life, human population growth to the point of like 7, 8 billion people on this planet is a statistical improbability, like a rare miracle to emerge in a universe that's supposedly totally random and mechanical. Now, of course, it's not, but it's one way of defining the fact that we're not here because of statistical probabilities. We're here because there's an actual mission orientation, there's an intention, there's a directionality to the universe itself. And that's what we have to be vulnerable, tenderhearted to respond. So Trump has established a peace dialogue, a negotiation with Hamas and Israel in Egypt. And it looks to be, reports are right now that this is it's just figuring out the specifics for the prisoner swap, the hostage released, so that everything is done and everybody kind of knows what's going to happen, how it's going to happen. Trump is saying this has got to happen quick, fast. So we'll see how quickly this can be expedited. But certainly his entire team is going to be there on the ground looking to make sure this is the case, that Netanyahu is not going to bomb Qatar again. I mean, some people are even saying that bombing in Doha, Qatar, that Netanyahu did, apparently in opposition to the IDF and Mossad, if you can believe that. That's what's reported. This is, of course, a couple of weeks ago, while there were negotiations going on, that was actually a certain point for Trump to say, okay, basically, I'm choking Netanyahu's chain at this point. I'm like, this is it. And even told Netanyahu when he talked, why are you so effing negative all the time? Basically, like, you're going to have to get behind this deal. And that's what's reported. Trump said they don't have an option. They've got to basically get behind this. And Trump has worked the Israeli crowd and the Israeli nation to where he's more popular than any of their political leadership. He's done that with a very thoughtful intent that he knew when it comes down to when he has to apply real leverage, he wants to have that real leverage to apply so that it's forceful, like it has effect. And everyone thought he could never do that, or he was controlled by Israel, or he's controlled by the Arab states. I mean, all these people think that it's just a kind of cynical mapping that somebody like Trump doesn't have a tender heart to get what needs to get done because he wants to solve and stop the bloodshed. I mean, no one looks at Gaza and goes, oh, that's a beautiful thing. Yeah, Israel's really getting the job done. It's complete mass destruction. And there's no way you could ever bomb Hamas out of existence. It's just not, I mean, Hamas is just going to recruit from other locations. It's an international terrorist organization. So this obviously has created a lot of support from unexpected places in the mainstream media, people that are just somewhat stunned that Trump has pulled this off. It's a huge, huge deal. But it gets at then, and let me just say that it's obviously going to have an impact on the Ukraine-Russia situation. That situation continues to grind down. There are casualties significant on both sides. There have been elections. Moldova has consolidated power for the kind of NATO globalists. Czechia, or Czech Republic, just held elections in their parliament, and they have a new conservative parliament that is largely going to side more with Slovakia and Hungary. So Europe is increasingly changing. Countries are kind of rejecting this globalist orientation. And once Trump can seal the deal in Gaza, his efforts are going to increasingly move to that war, um, which Zelensky himself has already made certain kind of remarks that as long as we don't give up everything, we didn't lose the war, meaning if we don't give up the entire country. So certainly a complete change of expectations. Ending these wars will have a huge impact on undermining those. One, it'll change the hearts of those who are just honestly cynical because it's been a rough road for decades. I mean, I don't admonish anyone for maybe being cynical. The point is that it's not helpful. As much as it's understandable, it is not helpful. People have to shift into a new mode of operating. But ending these wars will help that a lot. It will also then take the more intelligent war operatives who are feeding in this cynical approach, one, because they just want hits, they want personal renown. Everybody likes a cynic. A cynic can always get a crowd because everybody wants to hear how other people are effed up. I mean, what's the one thing a lot of people will like listening to? Somebody talking about how messed up everybody else is. This is Nick Fuentes for, Zoomer boys and Zoomer young men love listening to Nick Fuentes because everybody's effed up. I mean, that's just kind of what it is. It's like the most entertaining thing when you're going through like this horrible dark age crisis. But for those people, Trump ending the wars is going to change a lot. And a big part of this, we've seen this now ongoing, is this question both with Israel and Islam, because these are becoming huge, huge factors inside. Well, how does the United States, how does MAGA deal with this? Israel has become overt in their attempt to control the PR of our own country. Netanyahu has explicitly called for the takeover of media corporations. Larry Ellison, who is a big Zionist backer, Larry Ellison, the founder of Oracle, which started out with, it got its big claim to fame in database and data management with the CIA. So, just part of the deep state Silicon Valley corporations that were built up since the 70s. I mean, people say like they really worked hard to make their billions. It's like, well, you get a CIA contract that really helps. Um, but right place, right time. Nonetheless, Larry Ellison is a big Zionist, and he has now bought TikTok. He's bought CBS News. He's bought Paramount. He's attempting to buy CNN. So there's this whole Israel, Israel, Israel thing. Netanyahu called for this. And of course, there's all kinds of discussions. People that have said Israel has way too much influence and control over the United States. Practically that Israel is, and I've talked to students on college campuses, Israel is the globalist control of the United States. It is Israel. That's it. Israel are the globalists. Israel is the controlling factor in the United States government. Now, there's no argument that Israel has an outsized influence inside the US government. But the bigger question is, do the Israelis benefit from this kind of globalist, neoconservative, neoliberal agenda? And some people think, oh, absolutely. They're becoming so powerful in the Middle East. And then you go, okay, so they could win a war with Qatar or the UAE or Saudi Arabia. Okay, maybe they could. Could they win a war against Iran? Didn't seem like it the last time just a couple months ago. Could they win a war with the second largest army and military power in NATO, Turkey? Everyone goes, oh, I totally forgot about Turkey. Yeah. You just forgot about the second largest military power in the West? I mean, Turkey, whether it's in the West or East or not, but it's in NATO, and it's the second largest military power in NATO. No, Israel couldn't. So Israel's not becoming some kind of Roman Empire of the Middle East. Israel is nothing less, in terms of the Netanyahu and globalist, Zionist, AIPAC lobby faction, nothing less than the same British intelligence creation that the Rothschilds and others were creating in the late 19th century. It is that ultimately came to control the Levant and this entire area after they dismembered the Ottoman Empire and took over this entire region. Um, so this faction in Israel is directly tied to the same British globalists we've been referencing for quite some time. And so to have anybody just decide to now focus on Israel and the Jews as like the conspiracy in the world, to me just looks like people trying to redirect MAGA into this kind of Israel is the problem. We don't have to worry about the banks, London, Brussels, the British and French old colonial corporation powers, the globalist corporations. Don't have to worry about any of that structure, the actual principalities and powers that hold real weight in the world and have largely then governed Israel for the last 25 or 30 years, of which Netanyahu is a leading representative of. We just now have to focus on Israel. And then you get others where you've got this whole tension around Islam. I see it here in Michigan because we have Dearborn and there's this whole contentious issue with this Dearborn mayor. Because there's a kind of, in some sense, probably because of these like left-leaning liberals and their anti-Christian tendencies and their promotion of Islam as a more peaceful religion, and this antinomy, antagonism between Islam and Christianity. There's all this kind of furor. And of course, we all know how people can get sucked into, because the cultures are very different. Islamic cultures are very much not assimilated to European culture to a large extent. That doesn't mean that many Muslims cannot be or aren't. Obviously, certain countries have been very elevated. Lebanon was very developed, and so other parts are as well. It's just not the point. The point is that there is a difference of culture and outlook, but there are also very common universalities. But there's this huge tension. I get it. Like, I don't lack. I mean, if people are wondering but is that key? It's without a doubt that we won Michigan because, and I saw this personally, I saw Yemeni and young Muslim kids in cars of like 4 or 5 come to vote on voting night to vote for Donald Trump because he was committed to peace in the region. The question here is not ideological purity. The question is political power in the United States. MAGA is a coalition that Trump inspired, that our founder, Lyndon LaRouche, sought to help build, which was that working class people, black, white, Hispanic, largely all Christian and conservative, black, white, and Hispanic, would be mobilized, and that you would be able to pull in these other immigrant groups, the engineering crowd, the pro-business crowd, into this kind of process because the orientation was economic growth and development and to end the conflicts abroad. That would ultimately be a winning political coalition. And Trump inspired that. You listen to his escalator speech in 2015, this is what he comes down and says. So, you have a fight now. To me, it's even, Israel question, what Larry Ellison is doing, it all looks very bizarre. Doesn't look good. Looks like a PR failure to me because it's already all exposed. It's not like it was done in secret in any way. The tensions on some of these questions, of some of these concentrated immigrant groups in the United States. We just have a massive immigration problem. Oklahoma pulled over 500. In Oklahoma, they did a pullover of all semi-trucks. This is happening in different parts of the country. They pulled over like 520 semi-truck 18-wheelers just to check who's driving them, because we've had some accidents with people that were illegal and didn't have proper licenses, didn't read English, didn't understand the road signs. And over 25%, or approximately 25% of the drivers, over 125 of the 500 plus drivers, were illegal. Basically, were given CDLs inappropriately based on the Biden agenda of letting people come into the country unidentified. One driver's license literally had no name on it. It said no name. And these people are all 20, it's upwards of 25%. The Trucking Association in the United States is estimating there are upwards of 200,000 illegal drivers who do not speak English, people that speak only Mandarin or Russian or other various languages. So we have this massive influx, and you see the tension. You see the tension on ICE. You see it in Portland or Chicago. These are just going to be huge battles. We could talk about the court cases, but I think that's not really, people want to raise it in questions. We can. There's certainly a lot going on to talk about. But to me, the question is that the idea that this attempt by Revolver News to separate MAGA is not economic populism, it is anti-woke, is to say, well, what is anti-woke? Wokeism is so destructive because it destroys the economy. It destroys business growth. It destroys education. It destroys kind of the cultural fabric. It undermines wages. This whole immigration question, a big factor. Imagine 200,000 jobs opening up for truck drivers, what that would mean for truck driving wages in the United States. So to separate that, you can separate culture from economics is completely antithetical to the entire kind of political moment we're in, where culture, economics, religion, politics, history are part of aspects of human identity. They're aspects of culture broadly, the national culture, the esprit de corps of your citizens, of your people. And so this attempts to separate or gatekeep and say who can be legitimately MAGA, who can't be. This was similar to the pressure that Charlie Kirk was facing before he was killed, that he wasn't necessarily going to keep gatekeeping people that were evangelical Zionist Christians, people who were Tea Party libertarians. He got a lot of backing, a lot of money, hundreds of millions of dollars from people that specifically wanted those ideologies promoted and professed. He wasn't necessarily looking, he didn't sell the idea of Turning Point as this broad-based cultural civilizational revival of the United States. But when Trump won, that's what Turning Point became. It wasn't a narrow ideological road, of von Hayek and von Mises anymore. Now it was, how do we build the country? Tariffs, industry, manufacturing, get young men back into doing something productive and building again. So, I think to me, it's really important that all of us have aware that these are kind of the psychological operations going on. And in some sense, this is why, why Tony Papert, he's on, and if people have questions for him, he certainly, if you listen to the class from Saturday, he reads this speech from Lyndon LaRouche from 1990, so 35 years ago. 35 years ago, LaRouche recognized that there was something about Christian civilization that was under attack that was universal, of universal value, that its impact had an impact on Judaism, had an impact on Islam, had an impact on global civilization. And once it's ultimately understood and revived and integrated by around the 13th, 14th, 15th century in Europe, which is when you really get a revival of both kind of the population density collapsed with the Roman Empire collapse. Certain things were just no longer possible. The population finally grew back to density. There was a revival of certain ideas. And you started to get this kind of revival of a real Christian conception again, and an optimism and an excitement and a sense of building and developing a future that wasn't simply based on the past, that the hearts were becoming tender. And, ultimately, some civilization on the planet was going to become dominant and transoceanic. Could have been Chinese, it could have been Indian, it could have been Middle Eastern, could have been African, Sub-Saharan, could have been North African, Egyptian. But it became Europe because of this kind of revival of the qualities of Christian civilization that put now a clear emphasis on the quality of the individual. The individual ultimately is the vehicle we have to apprehend new discoveries, new ideas, the courage to take bold leadership steps. Ultimately, more people are always involved, but it is through the vehicle of the human individual, which that divine in Christ and in the Christian outlook really kind of established, in an undeniable way, that becomes integrated into European civilization. Now, it doesn't mean that the colonial elements were great. It just means that why did Europe become the dominant global culture? That wasn't inevitable. It wasn't because of the lack of melanin in the skin, or, that had nothing to do with it. It had something to do with a cultural conception, a cultural idea. And despite all of the failures of colonialism, especially in Africa and Asia and South America, that concept was brought to the United States and established as a different kind of culture and civilization, not a for-profit attempt like in Jamestown, Virginia, or other for-profit colonies, but by these working class pilgrims, that they wanted to build a different kind of civilization based on this, what you might call a grassroots form of Christianity. Maybe something that's best expressed in a book from the late 15th century, a guy named Thomas à Kempis, called The Imitations of Christ. But it's a grassroots kind of Christian outlook that brought to bear the nobility, the virtue, and the expectations of identity of a true Christian individual, not simply to pay heed to the rules of the Rome or the papacy, but what it truly meant to live as an individual, to capture and express the divine. And this was the kind of thing that inspired this foundation in the development of the United States. It's what was the kind of foundation that inspired people like Dante and the emergence of this golden age of Europe, this kind of revival of both a Christian conception of the individual and an optimism, a tender heart towards the future, towards unfolding what God's creation ultimately was. And so the nature of that is a big part of what I think is happening today. And, it's going to be interpreted different ways. And there's going to be a number of attempts to silo it, to put it into categories, to try to box it in and to say, it's this, it's that, it's this, it's that. But it's far more universal. It will likely break out of any attempts, because the trust of anybody attempting, so-called any expert saying, well, this is what MAGA is just BS. Most people say this is just absurd. This is not how this functions. We're not going to be categorized by anybody. We are going to respond as we see fit to respond and to develop this movement. But that quality of identity, that strength of fortitude in the individual, kind of in the eyes of God, that the individual value, man, woman, and child, captures that quality of divine value in some estimation, is abhorrent to the globalist oligarchs. And this gets at why the Christian question has been so under attack, either to turn it into some kind of fundamentalist, peripheral grouping, to eliminate the kind of, or try to take away the core substance of what a Christian worldview and Christian belief is from the actual, individual responsibilities, individual quality of life, which has always been the most compelling. That people that are transformed, that accept Christ in their heart, to accept the notion of God, that previously didn't believe, become more virtuous, more noble, more tenderhearted. And this is true of conversions to Judaism or even Islam. I mean, if it's done through a dialogue and to that kind of process, then there's something transformative. But in the Christian outlook, there's a special value not placed on joining the Jewish community as a tribe, or Islam as a grouping of a religion, but there's a specific individual relationship to God you have as an individual, as Christ was an individual. And the oligarchy abhors this. It is the problem, because that is where the power of human civilization exists. Yes, we have power in numbers, but numbers unorganized, numbers without coherence, numbers without leadership, numbers without a grassroots quality of virtue and nobility is easily targeted for destruction. That's where they always try to kind of categorize it, debase it, lower its quality, lower its value. And to me, this is the higher spiritual facet of what MAGA has been. Certainly, the assassination of Charlie Kirk kind of awoken um, that element in even perhaps more intimate ways for many people. They saw the specific threat and challenge. They saw the intrinsic goodness of the attempt of dialogue, of preaching one's faith and immortal commitment, a fight, commitment to the eternal, not just commitment to personal success in the here and now. And we're touched by it. I mean, Trump is pulling off an end to these wars and being able to turn then the full power of his attention and his government towards rebuilding the country is going to be a major factor in the 26 midterms and going into 28. He just sent out a truth today calling for the big housing builders, which have basically become a cartel. He compares them literally to OPEC, that they're basically a cartel. Brian Lance has covered this in depth, and I'm sure we'll have a Saturday class on this soon. Trump says we have 2 million empty lots that need houses built in the United States. Without expanding into federal lands or doing other things, we've got 2 million empty lots. Why isn't anybody building? The credit's available. The money's there. Why aren't you building? Well, Trump's basically saying, you're just trying to keep prices up. And basically price most Americans, especially younger Americans, out of a home. Well, that's not how this country is going to work anymore. And of course, ending these wars allows Trump to bring that kind of economic authority and leverage fully to bear inside the United States. It's this kind of economic growth, a commitment to peace and real economic growth, which is quintessentially what the MAGA coalition and the MAGA movement are dedicated to. But of course, it is something deeper. And I think we all have that it's a movement that has the strength to repel any attempt to silo it or categorize it. So I think that's kind of where we are. This immigration fight is going to continue to be huge because it has been so embedded and corrupt in our country. Just imagine 200,000. I don't know how many truck drivers we have. 200,000 seems like a lot. That would be, and it's 4,000 in every state, practically. But it's embedded everywhere, and it's just gone absolutely crazy. And there's an attempt to say we shouldn't abide by or follow the laws. We're going to follow the laws, but if we just follow the laws and we don't rebuild the country, if we don't create real economic growth, it's not going to work. Trump sees it. It's kind of a masterful potential inflection point by ending these wars and being able to really ensure that that kind of economic growth coincides with, cleaning up the mess that Biden, Obama, Bush, Clinton, the so-called hardcore globalists have pushed on us for almost 40 years, that reign comes to an end. So anyways, that's what I wanted to say tonight and open up with remarks, and kind of interested to see what other people are thinking. So why don't we see, Keisha, what you're thinking, and then see if people want to line up and take questions.
Yeah, you laid out quite a bit, and that is great. Well, first of all, I wanted to say that in the context of President Trump's drive for peace, which has been his number one initiative outside of stopping the illegal immigration coming across our border, his initiative has been to stop the killings and the wars and to make sure that new wars are not started. And so what is transpiring with his negotiations and talks in the Middle East between Netanyahu, Israel, Hamas, but also I think I understand that I don't know if there's further details put out on it, but that President Putin of Russia called Netanyahu today, and they discussed the peace negotiations of President Trump and what has been laid out, as well as discussing something very important, which is what's happening with the conflict between Israel and Syria and Iran, especially around the nuclear power developments, and discussing coming up with negotiations and around that. But all of this, none of this is going to achieve true peace without economic development. This is what Lyndon LaRouche understood. This is what Trump clearly understands. He put this out, put this forward in his Abraham Accord initiatives beforehand, which really took off in a very important way, which faced a lot of uh, pushback against it as well. So now, with President Trump saying we got to give young people in the United States an opportunity for economic success, we have to give young people in the Middle East, in Gaza, in Israel, this opportunity for economic success. And I think that that is what really shows the softness and the true Christian spirit of President Trump in his heart, and that all human beings deserve the right to this profound identity in terms of being a part of something great, being a part of true economic success. Um, I just wanted to say before I open up the discussion, though, because I think what something you brought up last week was extremely important also. Um, this question of Christian civilization really, and the individual role really is identified by redemption. And, there's a lot of people that believe that, maybe even some in our own ranks, so forth, that everybody is just good and they just have to reach down in them and find their goodness. Um, there is the redemption through this personal relationship, redemption through Christ, forgiveness of sins is what actually allows for that good to come forth when that is accepted. And I truly believe that, because there is not just the good is going to automatically come out. We know that that's not the case. And you see the exemplification of the true power of identifying what is that which is truthful. When I brought up at the beginning of this discussion, the profound uh, text of Luke 19:40, which, the Pharisees are telling the disciples that they need to stop Jesus has to stop the disciples from going forward into Jerusalem. And he says, if you silence them, the rocks are just going to cry out. That truth and the glory of God exists. And no matter what, no one's going to stop that. And so there is, it's not just, it's more said in his text, it's not just biblical, it is universal in terms of an ordering in the universe that is so beautiful that people cannot deny it, and that it can be known and discovered. And so I think that as someone who is profoundly Christian, but also understand working with Mr. LaRouche and working in this context for many years, it is very beautiful to be able to take that truth and know that it's knowable, and take that principle, biblical principle, and that you apply to living your life by, and say that this is what can be applied in every aspect of our society, especially in economic principle, to a profound concept that would transform our society and give especially young people an opportunity at new life. And that's I didn't know anything about Charlie Kirk, but that's the profound thing about someone that no one, really was paid. A lot of people weren't even paying attention to, but that could transform their life in such a way where you go to church and your minister is sitting there and they're just awestruck by what this individual person in their individual quality and relationship can bring and profess upon society. And what each person can strive to become in their own identity and their own personal relationship, which I think is extremely important.